Hey guys, FilthyRobot here, bringing you the guides, tips, and tricks video. This time asking the question of how strong is the grave robber? Alright, as always with these videos, I need to get this out of the way. I am assuming that you guys are playing on the hardest difficulty levels and encountering this same difficulty stuff that I play on, that being NG Plus or hard mode or Stygian or Blood Moon, whatever it's called at the moment, as well as no light runs for the large part. Again, I don't really mind if you aren't, because all the information I tell you that applies to the hardest stuff is going to also be good information to have at the lower levels of difficulty, but it's still worth noting that is the kind of take home where I'm approaching this, or the position where I'm approaching this from. Alright, let's talk about the Grave Robber. Let's talk about the stats specific to the Grave Robber. She is one of the lowest HP characters in the game, and you're going to notice that in the Grave Robber a lot. Very low HP. She has quite high dodge, but dodge is fairly bad as a whole for reasons we've discussed primarily in the Abomination video if you want to reference that. But a quick recap, basically lots of monsters will still, regardless of how much dodge you have in terms of your base dodge, a lot of monsters will still have enough accuracy to be at full chance to hit you, which is 90% chance to hit you. Dodge is unreliable, which means that a lot of times when you need a dodge, you won't get it. So if 2 crits in a row, dodge doesn't protect you at all a lot of the time, etc. I'd rather almost always have HP than dodge. It just smooths out the variance in the attacks with larger HP as opposed to dodge for the moments where it sucks, at least in my opinion. So I mean, to be fair, with dodge, sometimes you get hit twice, you'll dodge them both, and you don't have that scenario, sure. But in the scenario where the dodge failed, I would rather have the HP, because I can play around that, where I can't play around the dodge not working. Very fast, speed 10, one of the fastest classes in the game. I like that in terms for a damage dealer, and the Grave Robber is almost entirely a damage dealer in terms of her abilities. I do like the high speed. The problem with the high speed on such a low hit point character is it often means they will bleed to death or blight to death, because they'll go ahead of your healer despite being on death's door. That can be a little bit painful. Above average crit chance, but not super high. Average damage. Below average stun resist, which is super obnoxious. Above average blight resist. Average bleed resist. Average disease resist. Average move resist. A little bit below, actually. Average debuff resist, and high trap disarm, and high mobility. The blight resist is really welcome because, again, the number one reason you lose characters are crits and dots, which means that resisting those dot applying effects would be great. As I said, the Grave Robber is primarily a damage dealer. She has no ability to heal others. She has no ability to heal herself, although she does have an ability to remove blights or bleeds from herself. The problem with an ability like that, which we'll talk about when we get to it, is that it's too late by the time you can do that. And she has no heals. She does have a stun, but the stun is fairly awkward to use. It is Shadow Fade, which is a position 1-2, stuns position 1-2 on the other side, and it moves you back, which is not, A, you don't really care so much about position 1-2, and B, you're rarely going to be in a position where that's useful, but there are times when that's useful. We'll talk about that in a minute. But primarily, she can't stress heal, she can't really stun, and she can't heal, so all she really has left is a DPS role, and she's a little bit focused on that role. Like, she doesn't seem to have a lot of alternative options for that. Okay, let's talk about her skills. I tend to use these skills. Oops, where is it? I tend to have this on my bar for the Grave Robber. I will sub in flashing daggers on some boss fights, and I almost never use toxin trickery or poison darts. Well, there's something to be said about toxin trickery, and we'll talk about that in a minute. There is of these abilities, her better crit percent chance is on her dagger. The dagger also does additional damage versus marked targets, and it gives her an accuracy buff. So if possible, you want to be throwing the dagger as opposing to picking to the face. But as a whole, both of them are viable. So if you get in a position where you can't throw dagger, or you're trying to attack rank 1, pick to the face. I keep calling it mace to the face. Pick to the face is a viable alternative. Lunge is quite good. It is a single time you move from position 3 or 4, you move forward 2, you have a very high damage mod on it, 40% damage mod, and you have a crit mod on it of 11, so it is better, or rather the same crit chance as thrown dagger and quite a bit better crit chance than pick to the face, which means it's a nice move. It's a nice opener move to do high damage to a single target. And Shadow Fade means once you've rotated into those front areas, you can then back out of those front areas while applying a dodge buff to yourself. The design of the character seems to really be about mobility getting extra power for mobility, and then stacking up dodge to stay alive. The problem is dodge is just not a very reliable way to stay alive. But she is one of the 2 classes in the game, her and the Houndmaster, who can really stack a ton of dodge on themselves. And there is a role for that. It's primarily with the Houndmaster, but you can still do this with Grave Robbers, is you can dodge tank. This is a particularly effective strategy versus opponents that can only attack rank 1 and rank 2. If you can find opponents who can only do that, and there's a lot of them in the game, a lot of the skeletons do that, a lot of the cultists do that, then if you stack up dodge on rank 1 and rank 2, you can have essentially unlimited rounds to heal and stress recover in, because the 2 targets they can attack are almost never being hit because they're such high dodge, and the other targets in the back can't be hit because your opponent can't attack rank 3 or rank 4. And the Grave Robber can do that with Toxin Trickery, which applies dodge and speed, or with Shadow Fade. These are both ways that she can stack up dodge to actually usable levels. So the base level of 30 that she gets at level 5 really isn't usable in of itself, but that's a decent starting point for applying more dodge in a non-item way. So if you're doing this with just skills, you can extend the fight by keeping 2 enemies alive. I guess I should have maybe said this earlier, but if you guys don't know this already, if there's ever 2 enemies alive, no reinforcements are called. So if you keep 2 enemies alive, you can take as many turns as you want to do healing or stress recovery, and that's a very strong strategy for, in general, recovering at the end of a fight. So the Grave Robber and the Houndmaster are some of the 2 classes that are best able to do that style of recovery fight, because they can protect themselves with dodge, and the Houndmaster's case can protect 2 ranks with dodge. So, all right. So talked about Pick to the Face, talked about Thrown Dagger, talked about Lunge, talked about Shadow Fade. You basically do this to Lunge again, is what you do. So you're position 4, Lunge to position 2, Shadow Fade to position 3, then Lunge to position 1, which means you can do a lot of burst damage with the Grave Robber at fairly high crit percentage, which is nice. Flashing Daggers, the bleed resist is pretty useless by herself. She has no bleed abilities. I guess it's okay right now with the Highwayman bleed and Flagellance bleed being pretty decent. So the Houndmaster too, I suppose. It's okay, the bleed resist. I just never even noticed that bleed resist portion of it. I like this ability because it is a decent mid-rank AoE. It's one of like very few mid-rank AoEs. I think the Abomination, Blight, and this ability might just be it. And the mid-rank AoEs are good on a couple bosses. It's good on Hag, whose pot is 1-2, while Hag is 3-4. So that means a middle rank AoE there can do the last blow to the pot if you need it, while simultaneously doing damage to the Hag. It's good versus the cannons, where you often want to do just a little bit more damage to the match guy who's lighting the cannon, while simultaneously doing some damage to the boss. And I think there may be 1 or 2 other bosses where position rank 2-3 damage is fairly good. So it's kind of a nice skill to sub in occasionally. Poison Darts, I don't understand the design on this at all. It's usable from the same positions where her other abilities are usable, and it doesn't have any upfront damage on it. It's minus 90% damage mod, so I guess it does have a very, very small amount of upfront damage. It applies a Blight, but it's not a huge blight or anything, and there's no upfront damage on it, and it debuffs the target to give them minus blight resist. Who fucking cares? Why would I ever use this ability on a Grave Robber? She's not about that. She's not about dot damage. You're going to itemize her to get extra damage off of direct damage in terms of plus damage percentage, which doesn't really help blights. She doesn't need a blight particularly. I don't understand this ability. This ability always just boggles my mind. Like, why is it there? And then the worst part is she gets gear that's itemized to extra blight percentage. Why? Why does she have extra blight percentage on gear? Like, it makes no sense. And Toxin Trickery is a Cure Blight Bleed that also gives you dodge and speed. She's already fast enough. The speed is actually more of a liability than it is a benefit. And the Cure Blight Bleed is not really a very strong ability without a heal on it as well. The problem is, if she's blighted and bleeding, if it's not damage that has her at 0, okay, then you can just go ahead and Toxin Trickery and remove that if it's necessary, but that means you waste an attack. But if it is damage that puts you at death's door, in other words, if you're at 0 health and you have a blight or a bleed on you, that means your turn has to start, in which case the blight and bleed does damage to you, and then you have to roll against death's door. And then you can cure it. If you rolled against fucking death's door, you've already got to the point where you might have lost the character. And if you got to that point, you're already in trouble. In other words, this is too late for the Cure Blight Bleed to be useful. Maybe if it could give you, maybe if it was Cure Blight Bleed and resist extra Blight Bleed or something, it might be better. I don't know. The point is I rarely use this ability, mostly because I think the design of the ability is not very good. All right, that said, let's take a look at her abilities. Her abilities are okay. Pilfer we've talked about in the Antiquarian already, but essentially it produces a random supply item. I rarely find this useful, but I do sometimes have the position where I have one camping point remaining and that I can use this to just fill that camping point, and sometimes it will be, very rarely, it will be something I can use. Night Moves is alright. It is very cheap scouting. For a cost of 2, 30% scouting is pretty decent value. So that's not bad at all. Mostly because it's when you have to cast other things, but you still want to get some scouting. That's quite nice. Gallows Humor I like. Overall, it's quite a lot of stress reduction, and it's guaranteed stress reduction on the character casting it. It does have a downside of sometimes giving additional stress, but most of the time it's going to come out in your favor, although it's quite expensive at cost 4. That's quite a lot. And Snuff Box is really good. Not only does it remove diseases on herself, which is nice, it also removes disease on a companion, and it only costs 2 to do both of those. It's pretty good, and it's a way of mid-dungeon removing a nasty debuff, or sometimes just saving money. If you know you're going to have a grave robber, you can send them on a mission with someone with a disease. That said, she's kind of one-dimensional, and she's not super great at her job. She is low HP and very, very fast, which is a nasty combination. With not great resists, particularly to bleed and stun, and low HP. And she's often in position 1 and position 2 because she lunges forward to get the most advantage out of her high damage abilities. She often puts herself in harm's way, position 1, 2. And that's kind of bad. That means that she is often going to be in scenarios where she's risking dying. Because she takes because position 1, 2 is going to take more damage than position 3, 4. There's more things that can hit position 1, 2. If you put them in position 1, 2, you're running the risk of dying. Yes, you can use dodge buffs, but it's very action inefficient to do that. It takes a lot of actions to stack up dodge to any sort of reliable percentage, and she's very, very vulnerable to being crit and bled to death. And because she's so fast, she'll almost always, in that scenario, act before the healer, which means that, okay, she gets crit and bled, then she goes next. She has to survive a death door before she can heal her, which is kind of bad news. And I don't like how she has no real versatility in terms of protecting others or healing others. So the dodge stuff is okay on her, but not good. Her itemization stuff tends to be fairly poor. Her damage is all right, but not amazing. Her crit percentage is kind of nice, which is good. She's very fast, which is both good and bad, but her health is really the scary part for me. I actually put Grave Robbers in fairly weak at the moment. I just think that as the game has changed, she's become more and more of a liability than she's ever been before, and they're just better classes for fulfilling her role. So, all right. So, yeah, I put her in as weak. So, anyways, guys, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully this was entertaining and informative, and I will see you soon.